All right, am I live? I'm live. Hello YouTube, Tom Kaczynski here for a special unplanned show just because tomorrow I probably won't be able to do one. I'll be out traveling to go get my computer, actually. That's one downside of where I live. If I want to go get something done, inevitably ends up being a 4-hour trip, two down, two up. So I will be very busy tomorrow afternoon, and because of that, I won't have time to do a Wednesday night show. At least I don't think I will. I always reserve the right to change my mind if things go really well. But since I'm not going to be around with you guys on Wednesday, I decided to come on for a few minutes here on Tuesday. It's a little later than my normal time, so we'll see if people pop up, and if we do, we'll have a more involved show. And if not, hey, nothing lost, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I tell you what's annoying. I'm trying to find a live stream. I have the YouTube up, and I'm looking for live streams of what's happening here. With all these different groups that are out there. The problem is, it's like they only pick the sort of sanitized ones. I'd really like to see something a little more, I don't know, juicier. I don't know if there's anything interesting happening. So I'm going to put ABC on in the background, not because I really like ABC, but just because I wanted to have something to watch while I'm seeing this in the background and see if anything interesting is happening. So I figured I'd just come on for a few minutes tonight. I don't know how long I'm going to go on here or not, but I might go up to an hour. I won't go past that because I did start later. But P-Wing, my thought is that the evidence as of right now is seeming to suggest that it is not as lethal, but let's see. There is contradictory evidence as always, and frankly, I haven't been able to read the most recent lab reports because try reading a PDF on an iPhone. It's not very fun. I am looking forward to being able to go ahead and do a better job, and that'll be one of the best things of getting my computer back. I mean, I really don't enjoy doing all this stuff over my iPhone for any number of different reasons, some of which are more valid than others. But yeah, I'm just looking at what's going on out there and, trying to understand the bigger view of things. And I figured I'd come on here, sort of a comfy stream tonight, I guess, since everything's been so riled up. I've had so many conversations about the big issues happening and everything happening around here. And they keep calling them George Floyd protests. I mean, how much can you protest something that was actually handled in a way where they eventually ended up charging the guy with murder? I mean, it's terrible. Don't misunderstand me, but at some point, the thing ends up being discordant with what's actually being done, and I'm just like, but this is about something bigger. I mean, we are sitting. Actually, guys, let's go rabbit holey. So I was having a conversation with a very smart person that I know, and we were talking about what this looks like, where we go from threat to threat, from problem to problem. And what we have found that was really interesting is we found that all right, we'll put the angry prepper on as per your guys' suggestion. So what we found was that there's a very strange pattern to these things, and the person suggested to me that they thought maybe it was a pattern reminiscent of an AI. And I know that sounds sort of crazy, but as you go ahead and you have different strategies to do things, when you have an effort to disrupt every group and anyone's ability to work together, that really does destroy a culture. And it's a clever strategy that could break any sort of people, because we don't really have the ability to go ahead and be as versatile in what our connections and bonds are. And I will tell you, it's an interesting thing, and I have to share a story. Pull a little closer to you guys, from the coronavirus community that we had built here that came from this. We lost a number of members in the last week because of all this riot coverage that we had to do in this protest coverage. And people went off in different directions depending on their different ideological backgrounds. And one of the things that really was disturbing is that you couldn't really hold friendships together because you came to core issues you disagreed upon. But what happens is, with every new issue, we get further and further segmented and divided. And so if you wanted to look at it from a strategic perspective, what we're really dealing with is a really bad divide and conquer type situation. And that's one of the things that's really disturbing me when I'm trying to look at the macro patterns on this. I'm trying to understand the problems that are out there, what we need to worry about, and what I can't help but notice is every time we get to something, there's another division, another division. Now, I will say the ones we're dealing with now, as serious as the virus is, and as awful as it may yet prove, right now it's hard not to pay more attention on the political things. I mean, I was reading the president's tweets this evening, and he's trying to at a very minimum, heighten the polarization, and I would not be surprised if we are heading towards at least the intent of maybe seeing a war come out of this. And that's a heck of a thing to be reported on, but that seems to be where we're going with it. And, I don't know how I feel about it. I'll be honest with you. I have, I wrote books about the topic, right? So obviously I have opinions on it. But the one thing that is kind of tricky, here, let me get, in 1 second, we're going to lower the phone down because I think it'll look better for you guys. All right, one book down. Good, that is better. One of the things that was really interesting about that is that I don't know how we reconcile the differences, and I guess that will be the topic of today's show. And as much as I have a topic, I'm just rambling here because I said to come on. But I'm just like, I don't know what we are trying to accomplish. I don't know what we can do together. I don't know if we want to do things together. And it's kind of an interesting question to me, how you deal with that in a society. I mean, if you have one group of people who want to be in charge of another group of people, this is why wars happen. This is why conflicts happen. And ultimately, you can break this down 100 different ways, but there's just different views and different things coming together in ways that don't allow people to connect. And I wish we could have conversations, but we don't really have conversations. We shout at one another. That's what we do. And look, I'm as guilty as anybody. I've been on the front line shouting, and I'm pretty good at it if I have to do it. I don't like to do it that way, but I know how to do it. And, it would be better if we could actually deal with some problems, but we really can't. And the funny thing is, the people who are fighting other people for power, neither of them are the ones who actually have the power. And it's just an irony that I can't quite get over. And yet, if you say, okay, well, I'm going to take over, the other group would be like, nah, we're climbing the ladder first. And it's really kind of interesting to see how those at the bottom kneecap each other constantly. And, the way you get over it and the way you get above it. And, maybe that's why when I'm happier, I spend a lot more time just reading my Bible, thinking about my faith, and doing that rather than watching things of, riots and protests in the street and all this other stuff that's going on and onward with this. So I don't know what's going to happen with it, but I am sort of curious about it. I am really wondering where we go from here, and I think things are going to get nutty this weekend. I think one of the interesting things that is happening is President Trump's coming up to rural Maine. I don't know what he's doing up here. He hasn't been in Maine in 4 years, and I found that an interesting little factoid. Apparently, we have one of the two places that make the test swab kits, so I guess it's a photo op or something, but it's kind of weird. I don't know what to make of it all. So, but yeah, good to see you here, and glad everyone's here. Today's going to be kind of an open, free-form show. I don't really have a lot to say in clear format. I've read all the news, but I don't know. I'm just kind of watching, and I figured I'd come on to take a look on the screen in front of me, see what was happening, and see if you guys had any thoughts, questions, ideas, just a little feedback, and we'll see. Maybe it works, and maybe it doesn't. I don't know. We'll see what we can come out of it with. Usually, I'm ready to come out sporting, a whole show, and there's a lot in that. I mean, you guys got to realize I talk into thin air probably. Let me do the math on it. Let's say at least 10 hours a week. That's a lot of talking, right? I mean, it's a lot to say. And coming up all in my head, I mean, obviously you have to have an active internal monologue, but that's where we're at now, and we'll see what happens. We really will see. So that's kind of what I got for you guys tonight. Other than that, just keeping an eye on different things out there. It's interesting that the virus has, not the virus, I should say, well, yeah, right, the virus too, that you see riots now. I saw some in Montreal. I saw some in Paris. We've seen some in different things. Really been a curious thing to watch this happen different ways. And I don't know, it's funny. It's hard for me to relate. I watch urban scenes. I live really in the country. I live in a town with, I think we have 1,600 people, let's say, and it's 200 years old, so it ain't going to be adding any more, not really. Although we've had an influx lately of people with other plates throughout New England. I even saw a Montana plate the other day. That was kind of crazy. But it's just like I watch people and living in that world. First off, I would never want to live in the city. I've lived in the city before, but I couldn't really enjoy it if I tried to. It's just, how would you be happy with all those people on top of each other? You couldn't hear yourself think. You couldn't hear yourself breathe. And so when I watch all these people just gather in masses, I look at it and it always feels like a hellscape to me. And I don't say that to be mean. I know there's some people who love that lifestyle. It's just, I don't know how one would do it. I don't know how I did it for all those years. When I don't have space, I get completely annoyed. I mean, and the wife is even more so that way than me. So, But I guess that's part of the story, right? That we would live very differently. And the shame of it is that we can't just find a way to live differently. I mean, once upon a time, you could actually separate and do things differently, and you could have one group do what they want and another group do what they want. And now it kind of gets stuck being a one size fits all solution. And I don't know, maybe we need to get away from that. I don't think people would go for it, though. I think people would rather fight others for going around that. But it will be interesting to see what happens tonight. We have curfews all over the place here. No Second Amendment there. I'm sorry to hear that, Johnny. Yeah, and I know the National Guard's been sounding off a little bit that they don't love the idea that they're going to be used for this. So we'll see to put things down. And I know the president thinks it's a very good idea to have a militaristic approach. I think that there are pros and cons to both ways about it. But ultimately, I guess it depends where you come from in a perspective. Like, I found it really ironic. One of my listeners went ahead and John, glad you made it, buddy. You never see these things, and I didn't tell you. I just did it out of the blue. So glad you're here. So I had a guy ask me, like, aren't you worried about them labeling Antifa a domestic terrorist organization because it might lead to overreach? I'm like, dude, I've been chased by these people in the streets before. You think I'm worried about it? I'm looking at this and thinking, finally, the tables have turned. But he had a point, for people who don't live in the world, who think that, that there aren't arbitrary distinctions between who's good and who is bad. And man, I wish I lived in the world. Well, actually, I don't. But it seems to me, watching this, a lot of people live in a world of a simple morality tale, where they really think there's a good side and a bad side. They believe they're Dumbledore's army marching against the evil Orange Man. And it's not that way. There are just different interests that are up there. And let me tell you something, FEMA 1's where it's at. Got to represent. So yeah, I mean, if you've ever dealt with Antifa in the street, I will tell you, and I've dealt with them. Some of you have. I mean, they are mean-spirited, violent, self-righteous, and not very pleasant people. Usually, they're really not. And plus they usually have a weird odor, like they haven't showered in a long time. It's one of those things about them. I don't know why they do that. I'm sure there's a reason. I'm not really interested in it. So no, I don't feel bad about them being targeted, and that was one of the things. But it was sad in our group because we had people who were out there, and we were trying to converse. And the thing about the Coronavirus Central group that I was proudest of is we actually were having dialogue across different lines. We were having a very effective dialogue in a lot of ways, and we recognized there were bigger issues. But what happens is you get a new issue to deal with, and you get a new division you have to work through, and you can't, and then you go back to old divisions. And it's interesting, people who I haven't been talking to for weeks, I'm talking to now, and people who I've been talking to every day, I can't talk to them. And it's constantly dividing and dividing and dividing, and we get isolated further and further, and we can't have conversations, we can't do things. And like my friend noted, you can't keep the lines of communication open, so she was saying to me she thought it looked like an AI type attack where it's basically a distributed ability to keep people from communicating by always changing the narrative to change the polarizations around. So it's sort of like, if you think of people as having magnetism, it shakes us into a lot of different directions, and it's kind of clever. And so we get into this sort of highbrow conversation that was interesting, but what I ended up saying was, I was like, the only way you can beat a system that looks for patterns is to act randomly. And I think we are now in a position where you're going to see the responses are going to be very different, and they're going to be unpredictable on all fronts, including from the government, which is weird. Good to see you, Marina. Glad you're here. And let me say hi to everyone who's here with us tonight. Geopod, glad you're here. DWR, glad, yeah, you don't want to be on the front lines, dude. It sucks, trust me. John, good to see you, and everyone else who's here. Rachel, glad you're here. JCO, everyone who's here. P-Wing, Alexa, glad you're here as well. So everyone who's here, Landon, good to see you. And yeah, I hope, I don't know. It's like, it's funny too. People have said, I had this one guy who was asking me, he's like, why don't we go out there and do something? I was like, dude, everyone who I know who's ever done anything, these people go out and march in the streets, okay? They have thousands. I mean, let me just put this. I'm just going to say it. You might want to believe it, but I'll tell you, it's real simple. All right, Derek, good to see you. And I'll say this, that literally you have thousands of people out there marching, including active acts of arson, and this is presented as a heroic march. They had 300 white guys march around in Virginia, and they presented as the worst terrorist attack in the history of the United States. So if you want to know why people who lean a certain way are all sitting at home doing nothing, despite the fact that there are many very passionate people who would love to have their rights protected, their First Amendment right, their Second Amendment right, it's because the government has been weaponized against against us for many, many years. The local governments have done so, and the Trump administration has been no friend to people who have been on the right wing. And it's not just us either. I mean, you look at CPAC, you look at places, the people who were banned from those outings were crazy. So there's a whole spectrum of people who are almost post-political, who look at America as a country that hated us and that really we didn't want to deal with anymore. And no, if you go on poll, I understand why those guys say, it's not our fight, because it isn't. We're not going to get involved with this. But until the state decides, either we have to wait for the state to solve the problem or the state to collapse from the problem, and then the cavalry can ride in. But this is literally where we're at. And I think from the right wing perspective, that's how we look at this. The left wing perspective of this is, I try to be understanding of both sides, because I mean, I have my opinion, look, and I have self-interest. I'm not going to deny that. Why would I deny that? That's bullshit, and we're not going to bullshit you. I don't have time for that, and you wouldn't listen if I did. You'd call me on it, and you'd be right to do so. But I get why other people have different interests and different identities, and that's fine. I have no problem with people representing their own interest. I think that's smart. And if people choose to define their interest differently, I have no problem with that too. And the ability to compromise and get along. But I mean, what they advocate for, it's crazy. Like, and the other thing that's crazy too, like if you watch this, right, all these corporations just bend over. Like there was a guy who was the announcer. What is he for? It's Sacramento Kings or the Los Angeles Kings. It was for the Kings. I'm not sure if it was the basketball team or the hockey team who got put on cancellation because he said all lives matter. And it's just like, if you try to go ahead and not allow victim status, if you try to stand up for something separate from that, you end up in a position where they end up attacking you for that. And, the government's done that. I mean, let's be honest, there's a hierarchy of victims. If you want to know the hierarchy of victims in the United States, here's what goes. At the top of and this is what happens. If you're the biggest victim, you get to piss on everyone else going downhill from you. So at the very top are Jews, because Jews get to say the Holocaust is the singular defining event of human history, right? Beneath that are usually Native Americans, I think, because they will go out there and they'll say, hey, the land was stolen from us. Then, right about the same tier are blacks, who will go around and say, hey, we got everything horrible has been done to us. And then beneath that, a little bit is Latinos. You have that sort of thing. And the identity LGBTQ type groups, they're in this tier where, it's the not really as bad as other groups because you still have some agency, but hey, we're still support victims and we support those above us. Then you go down to women are about there. Women are falling off. If you're a white woman, you might not be a victim anymore, but women are still kind of on the chart. And then down here are white men, where you're over there and you can pick it out. You're Christian, heterosexual, rural, you can pick whatever you want. All those things, you're not allowed to complain. You're an evil bastard, you need to shut the F up. And that's how it's out there. And look, I'm not having a problem with people having other interests, but if you make everyone into a boogeyman who doesn't agree with you, don't be surprised when the boogeyman go ahead and say, hey, we're going to work together. And that's been sort of the problem of this whole dynamic, that this group, this entity, it could have made it about policing, they could have made it about other things, but instead they want to make it about race and identity, which is fine. But if you make it about race and identity against the state, and you go ahead and say that, don't be surprised when the state works with who's left to work against them. And that's where we've ended up in this thing. And it's a zero-sum game. And the thing that's kind of crazy about, and I tell you what, the thing that's weirdest to me about the whole thing, I can't wrap my head around this, is that the left started this at a time when they were winning. I don't think they know it, because their connection sometimes, to what's happening outside of their circles isn't very good. But they were coming out of COVID. They were winning in the sense that people were unhappy with Trump's response to coronavirus for a lot of different reasons. The economy was in the tank, and all they had to kind of do was keep quiet. But they can't do it because ultimately they want radical revolution. They want to live in the world of fantasy where outcomes are equalized, and it just doesn't exist. And more people have died in chasing that fake belief, the idea that we can make heaven of earth, than every religious war, every other war, everything pretty much of humanity has accomplished otherwise in human history. People have died for the myth of human equality and somehow us having a beautiful morality. It just doesn't work. And, it's one of those things that's really difficult. And explaining it to people is damn near impossible. But, we talk about it, so whatever. All right, let me see what you guys are writing, because I'm not looking as closely as I would here. Hey, Samsung asks, Tom, any ideas whether they don't limit the cell phone systems to 911 calls for the areas where the riots are happening to limit the communications of the rioters? You know what's a great question, Sam? The truth is, the people who are in these major cities are doing everything they can to keep them going. You know, when DC was burning, Governor Northam basically told them to go ahead and pound salt. I think that. Oh, thank you for that gift, by the way. That was really generous of you. But anyway, I was gonna say, ultimately, what ends up happening is that they didn't even try to help the Capitol. They would let the Capitol burn. They would let everything burn. I mean, you got to read the ideology of these people. I mean, these kids in the street who are just chanting slogans don't. I mean, you can go read the hardcore Marxist ideology. Their whole theory is to destroy what exists so they can build a new. Basically, they have a myth that goes sort of like the antediluvian myths. They want to go back to before the fall, and they have this idea that if you can go back far enough, you can go ahead and have people behave that way. And look, I would love to go back to the Garden of Eden too, but it ain't going to happen in this life. You know, if it does, it ain't going to be because of a human action, that's for sure. And they don't want to understand that. So what are you going to do? You know, that's part of the life. But was interesting. I had a gentleman. I will tell you a story though. You know, that's a little bit interesting. Is someone went ahead and they reached out to me. And they're like, you know, and it was kind of nice because I could tell it was the person's first white pill. And they went to me and they said, you know, Tom, I'm someone who supports the protest. I support this. You know, the usual caveats you hear out there. Be like, but I've noticed all these people are attacking me, and I'm not okay with that. Why are all these things anti-white? I mean, am I wrong to feel that way? I'm like, and all I said to him is, I was like, dude, you're not alone. And you know, some of you may have seen that video of the people in Indiana. There's these two black guys walking along a fence. This has to be in southern Indiana. I don't know which town it was in. And there's like literally 30 white guys with beards just standing there, relaxing, chillaxing, every one of them armed to the teeth, just watching their neighborhood, watching everyone walk by in the protest. And you could feel that the palpable tension. It was the perfect counterpoint to these things out there. These people are out there, you know, talking about justice and all, and these other people in the country, they don't want to be bothered. They have their guns, and they are just waiting. And that's what we're doing. We're waiting to see what's going to happen. And I think in America at this point, rightly or wrongly, we're waiting to see if law and authority can take control, or if these people start to. And if these people start to, let me tell you, it's like the one place we saw, I think it was maybe Memphis, where they actually brought a guillotine somewhere. It was crazy. But if that happens, then things get hot fast. And I think this spirals out of control quickly for one big reason. There's no one who can be the in between intermediary. There's no trusted source in between that we can trust, that we can look to as being helpful or useful and all that. And I know that's a harsh thing for people to hear, but that's where we are right now. And then we have to deal with the reality of that. So for the moment, we have to go ahead and, you know, accept this. And you know, look, I know not everyone in here is white, and that's fine. And I don't, you know, that's okay. It doesn't matter. You know, in terms of our ability to work together, to communicate, and all those sort of things, and to be in one nation. You know, some people have problems with that. I know some of the guys in this chat do. I am not one who has a big problem with that. You know, within, you know, the understanding that we work under common principles. But we don't have those anymore. We don't have common identity. We don't have common principles. And so what do we have? Is we have winners, losers, and we have people who impose things by force. And ultimately, the thing that I think everyone is starting to realize is that force is going to win the day. And whether it's the president using the military to knock these protests back into the, you know, the history, or if it's these protesters somehow eventually find the mob approach leads them to victory, I think everyone realizes that voting is a sham, and that whoever you vote for, you get the same policies regardless of what they promise. And I think that's just true. I mean, does anyone really think Trump or you know, Biden is going to massively change anything? I don't think so. Arian, my thought is that the last week has helped Trump immensely if he knows how to use it. We'll see if he does. I honestly don't know. I mean, what? Let's just say I am not the advisor to the administration, but ultimately the president is going to have to make a choice about how he wants to fight this going forward. I will say the last time something like this happened, 1968, there were riots all around America against civil rights, and what happened was Richard Nixon won in a landslide. Take it for what it's worth. People support the idea of rights. People support freedoms in an abstract sense. They don't support liberties that run into afoul of their ability to do what they want economically, you know, whatever. Hey, look, holding up the Bible is always good. Nothing wrong about that. And, you know, we'll see. We'll see. All right, so I'm going to go through and answer some of you guys' questions just to try to make this fun here. And I'm watching New York City, just a bunch of kids walking around in bikes. I don't know what's going on there. Let's see. It doesn't look that interesting to me, though. And hi to everyone. But and even if you're left wing, if you're right wing, whatever you are, look, man. I mean, it's fine to put out there. And I can't help but put out my sort of perspective on it, maybe because I'm tired of it. The press conferences all sound the same weird. Absolutely, that's true. Let's see. Am I talking about the locations of the protests being AI derived or larger issues? Larger issues. There is a thought that what is happening, it's kind of a crazy thought, but maybe not, is that the Chinese built an AI engine and the AI engine's trying to fight a culture war by allowing their assets to be employed in such a way to destabilize the United States. Sounds crazy, maybe not. Super spreads will be absolutely out. John is right here. Let's see. We talked about the cell phone system, so much forgotten since COVID amped up. Landon's right about defending yourself, and Landon's a tough dude, man. I faced him down once. He beat the crap out of me. I still have a backache. I'm just kidding. Landon's a good guy. And yeah, no, I mean it's true. I mean this is one of the things that I think people are seeing. Let's talk about it. And Johnny Reb writes, American institutions are uniformly anti-white. So are the corporations. So are the colleges. And it's strange. Why would you have it in a country where the majority is of a certain group that the whole system was against that group? It's a weird thing to have happen, and it's destructive. And it's not to say you have to be anti anything else, but if you're going to be anti-white, don't be surprised when people go for it. And let's be honest, a lot of people elected Trump in there because they wanted to see him go crack some heads. If Trump ends up in a fight with these protesters, yeah, the media will go nuts, the people in the street will be mad, and people will feel unhappy. But if it's seen as the protesters attacking the police and Trump puts them in that position, ultimately, that is one of those things that I think it will make him more popular. It will get him more support because at the end of the day, people respect strength. And people would rather have a strong leader that was wrong than a good leader who was weak. Because we count on our leaders to protect us. The world is a dangerous place, as evidenced by the last couple of weeks, and that there's a reason why history follows certain patterns. Not that complicated to understand, but y'all know what the deal is with that. All right, what else do we got here? I'm sure there's a couple Antifa in your state. There are always a couple of them. Let's see what else you guys got here. America died in 1865. That's interesting. Grant Napier, Sacramento Kings. So there you go. I was right. Let's see. It's disgusting that Canada is trying to replace its population too. The thing that really bothers me is that no one ever bothers to ask the people about who they want in their country. And look, I don't want to blame the people who come here. I don't blame them for wanting to get out of their horrible countries. I get that, but ultimately, the people are just treated as plebs in our own country. And I mean, in that sense, I get the direct action thing, man. I mean, I don't know. I could imagine. I mean, who knows? We live in interesting times, man. I don't know what we're going to see. I think that direct action is going to come from all directions, given enough time. And that right now, it's kind of like my dad used to say to me when I was a kid. It's actually his birthday. God rest his soul. He died a few years back. And he used to always say to me when I was a kid, Tom, I don't ever want you to start any fights, and you better not lose any fights. And that's what he said to me. And that's always stuck with me. One of those weird things, but it's absolutely been what I've learned over the course of my life. So we'll take it this way. Let's see. John says, I would be so embarrassed if I were a black American. Really, how is it that racism is still being spoken about, try to be fixed all these years later? There are people who milk it. Let's be honest with you, and that is a big problem. It has been an ongoing issue, and I will tell you, the solution of throwing money at the problem hasn't been right. I mean, the idea is you got to kind of let that community organize itself and stop apologizing for it and stop victimizing it and stop doing the whole noble savage thing that happens from time to time. I mean, and yeah, they do deal with more police brutality. That's true. But statistically speaking, they also commit a lot more crime. And so if you're going to talk about one side of the equation, you got to be able to say the other side of it. And that's the problem with our dialogue in America today. You can say the things that are good about certain groups, but you can never say the things that are bad about them. You can say the things that are bad about certain groups, but you can never say anything good about them. And we should be able to say both sides. I mean, if something's either true or not true, how do we determine that? We watch, we look at the evidence. And if you want to make a counter argument for why things are the way they are, that's your right. But the idea is that you have to say that somehow that you always have to agree that ultimately everyone's a tabula rasa, a blank slate, or that there aren't patterns that work negatively for certain things, and they absolutely do for all sorts of groups, or even white people too. Pathological altruism. I mean, we sit and let all sorts of horrible things get done to our people, and we don't care about it. It's disgusting. But these are things that exist, and they're real, and we should talk about them. We should absolutely talk about things that are real all the time. But instead, what we do is we fight for our fictions, because that's how we live in this world. We live in a fantasy land, and it's a useful fantasy for a little while, and then the fantasy dies. And COVID's a perfect example of that. I don't think it's a fantasy. I think the fantasy is that since we're bored of it, it's going away. I think all these people who are out there are going to go get sick pretty soon if they're not already. And since these antibodies don't hold on very long, I think they're going to get very sick. And then they're going to blame Trump somehow for it, or, and they're going to say it's his fault. And ultimately, at some point, it has to be your own thing. But I don't know. I mean, I've been watching this game for a long time, and I feel like I'm near the end of my fighting in it than the beginning. But I tell you this, um, we need out of this system. I mean, we need something different. And whether you lean left of center, right of center, whatever group you are, this shit show, I don't know what else to call it, isn't working. It isn't working for many of us, very few of us, and it just causes all these problems. And I mean, I guess I'm glad what I'm seeing tonight looks somewhat peaceful, and a bunch of people are out there marching. But honestly, they're just doing it because it's social signaling, and that's so much, how that goes. And we'll see. We'll see what happens in this, but we'll go through. I got a kind of a rough crowd tonight in here, so I'll talk to you guys a little bit, and we'll see what all we get in here. All right, let's see. Yeah, keep yourself safe. Absolutely. Yeah, I hate banks. I went from being a patriotic fanatic to having no patriotic feeling at all, writes Johnny Reb. Johnny, look, I understand that. I used to be very patriotic too, and my country told me it doesn't like me, even though it was people like me, like you guys, that built the damn thing. And if it doesn't want to be a part of us, that's fine. Then that's fine. We're just here. That's what it is. But the thing is, people don't go away. That's what people think. They think that you scold people. I mean, it's such Karen tier logic, right? But they think that you scold someone and then their legitimate self interest disappears. It just doesn't work that way, man. It doesn't work that way at all. But what can you do? And thank you, thanks for the super chat, Thomas. I appreciate that. All right, let's see what else we got here. Holding up the Bible. Oh, let's see. Yeah, no, you know what's interesting? I will say this. This has been my experience since John writes it. Blacks who actually take high responsibility for themselves are often the people who are most frustrated with their own counterparts. I've had that experience many times. That absolutely does happen. It's a thing. What's worse than Twitter is the endless virtue signaling on Instagram. Well, let's be honest. Social media, and no offense to the women who are here, but it's true, is a very feminine thing. I mean, this is what we do. We don't solve conflicts. We talk about things. We talk about things to death, and we fix absolutely nothing. And maybe the return of something more aggressive is needed because we haven't solved problems for decades, let's put it that way. Instead, we've talked ourselves to sickness, and what people have done is they've pretended, they've lied, they've separated, but we haven't really solved anything. To solve things, you have to come to a conclusion different people agree upon, and you have to have action involved, and that's where we're at now. We're going to see something different happen. Okay, what else do we got here? It's not moonshine, it's actually only water. So and let's see, Landon writes, it's a great distraction from his abysmal handling of COVID, the economy collapsing, and his failure to come to any of his campaign promises. It's absolutely true, Landon. I mean, for people who hold Trump to what he said from his campaign, he's been a terrible president. Nonetheless, if your alternative is this, this is going to, a lot of people who are feeling very soft in terms of their Trump support are now going to be more supportive of the president, mainly because this is why they voted for him, to prevent this. But ultimately, the people who oppose him are going to feel even more aggravated. And he was brutal tonight. I mean, what was he calling him? He said there's a bunch of bums and lowlifes breaking out in New York. It was pretty funny. I mean, but that's the thing if you were looking at it from one perspective. But he really has no ability or desire to unite the country, other than under a certain set of ideals. And it would be interesting to see if that follows through to its logical conclusion. It very well may, and that would be interesting. Do I think ending qualified immunity for the police needs to be modified and should their status be returned to civilian to make them one of us with their governing actions? It's an interesting question, Samsung. I understand what you're asking me. What he's basically asking is, should police be held liable for their actions? I will say that if you do that, you will not have police officers anymore. And so you have to decide if you're okay with that decision. One of the reasons why people who work for the state are willing to do so is because they have those protections and they have that degree. So if you don't have that, you will have other issues. Oh, here we go. We get some people mixing it up here on the Angry Prepper stream. Oh, I guess they separated now. I don't know what this is about. All these people are out there. They're hugging. They're doing else. I mean, but like this doesn't. I don't know. This isn't how change really happens in history. You guys are realists. You know how change happens in history and how it happens to these things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks. I will just put it to you that way. Was it Job Believe? Good to see you, man. Glad you are here. Let's see what else we got from here. But do I think ending qualified immunity would work? No, I don't. I think all it would do is destroy the police force. And I mean, realistically, the reason why police brutality happens so much is we live in a broken society. I'm not apologizing for what happened with Derek Chauvin. I think that was stupid. It was ridiculous, and I'm glad he's being charged. I think we have way too many laws. I think that's another problem, and way too many lawyers. But I don't know how you solve it. I mean, in a lot of ways, we're a brutal society because we don't have civility. And what's civility? We don't have the ability to agree on things. That's what we absolutely need. So I like how you say time and time again, we first have to have the conversation, go our separate ways. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not looking to fight people. I mean, I don't. I'll be very blunt with you. If it comes to a fight, if they really want to put it to a fight, that's fine. I will be out there in the field, and I make a hell of a general. I'm a frightful beast out there. That's what I do. I'm a Slavic savage, and I know it. My people have many, many years of dealing with awful fights in us, and I'm up in winter in my element. Good luck. But that is not the world that I think anyone should want because none of us know what's going to happen. And the truth is, whatever differences we have between one another, and they're very large, the external world has a lot of problems too. And don't think they're not concerned actors that are involved very much in this. And if we can come to amicable agreements about anything, I think that's better. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't see anyone being able to pull it back together. And it's kind of funny. I didn't realize that coming out of COVID that people were back to being so angry again. But I mean, it never went away. It just festered, and now we're back where we started, except with a lot more time on our hands and, basically free paychecks for pretty much everyone out there. So it's going to be a really nasty month, and we'll see how far it goes. I mean, if we have a full on standoff and if they keep going out there. But ultimately, that's going to be the question, and that's the only thing kind of worth watching right now. I mean, obviously, the rest of you should be home, staying safe, being smart about it, and not having things that are putting you at risk. All right, let's see what else y'all got for me. Asking me tough questions. It's all right. I don't mind. I'm probably get banned from YouTube for some of these answers, but that's fine. Yeah, I mean, you got to have the honest conversation. Landon's right. Absolutely. We need all these things. And I bet you're exhausted and burned out just talking to people and agreeing to disagree. I tell you what, I've been leading a lot of things for a long time, and I am exhausted and I am tired. But you know what? I'll sleep when I'm dead. That's where it's at. I mean, there's work that needs to be done, and I'm going to keep at it. And, that's what I do, man. That's why I come out here, and I always try to know what's happening first. I'm very good at that. And we'll see what happens next, man. I mean, I'm excited actually. I believe it or not. I mean, maybe it's wrong to admit it. I don't care. I'm excited. A world where things are getting radical is a world where things can change, and the world we've been living in is not good. It can be a lot better, and if it has to get worse to get better, I'm okay with that because I'd rather have the tape ripped off quickly. I'd rather have the rapid change than the gradual decline. I don't support that. I think that it's the only thing we have that's super valuable is time, and the people who are close to us. So hopefully we can work around that. And I try to find a way to be reasonable. What we can do, and we should be able to sit down and just go back to all here. If you had to pick one word about what's most important to you, one word, okay? What would you pick as that word? Would it be peace? Would it be opportunity? Would it be unity? Would it be culture, tranquility, faith? What would be the word that and I'll narrow this a little bit. If you had to pick a value you wanted your nation to have, let's put it that way, a single value for your nation that you want to be what the focus is for the next decade, because we're in a new decade, what would be that focus? And John said culture. Culture's a great choice. What would be that thing? And you tell me. I mean, and if you think peace is the highest value, okay, fine, and that's okay. Can it be brought back? Maybe. Will it be brought back? Possibly. Should it be brought back? Has anyone asked that question? Let's ask the question. We're here in Coronavirus Central Unscripted, where Tom runs the risk of getting censored every show he does. And I'm used to that. I've been censored by a lot of programs. Transcendence. That's an interesting choice. I could agree with that. I actually think Trump is more likely to get reelected than I did a week ago, Rachel. Mainly because this will fire up his base. The alternative was already fired up. Getting your own base fired up as an incumbent is always a challenge. This does it. So we'll see. It's going to be a nasty, hard fought election where both sides are going to accuse the other of cheating, and neither will accept the other's victory if we get there. But do I think he'll have more support out of this than he had before? Yes, I do. I think that there'll be more wringing of the hands, but I think the people who are not going out there in public, not going out there on Twitter, and won't go on media will be very happy. In fact, I'll tell you, I had a conversation. I was in town today. I had conversations with two or three different people, and they asked me, why hasn't Trump sent the military to get these bastards out of here yet? And I know that's not the position you see on social media, and you're not allowed to say those things, but in the real world, people are a lot more brutal, especially when you live in the country. It's absolutely the way it is. So that is true. Hey, Carbon, good to see you. And I do hope all the out-of-state plates don't bring COVID to Maine, too. If I was governor of Maine, I would have sent everyone with a Florida plate back. Have no doubt about it. And the first time they leave is the last time they're allowed to come back. I hate when people are snowbirds. But that's just me and how I see it. Okay, what else we got? The last patriotic year in Canada was 1967, the centennial, all downhill from there. I guess you're talking about Pierre Trudeau, right? I mean, you know what? I actually read about what do you call it? La Révolution Tranquille, and what's his name? Armand Duplessis. And what they, or Maurice Duplessis, my apologies. And, it seemed like they had a pretty good thing going over there. I'm a very big fan of the Quebecois, and, they rushed in with one opportunity to go ahead and, really change that country. But some people don't agree with that, and I have my own views on Canada that are very different than at least some Canadians have. Rachel's right. Social media is toxic because what you do is you go out there and you try to score points against someone rather than trying to win the argument. And when someone says something that offends you too much, oh, I don't like what he's saying. He should be shut down. I don't ask for anyone to be shut down. I want everyone who is mad, angry, whatever, to be able to talk. And I've been out on riots. I've been out at some of these protests, and I've had people up in my face, and I'll talk to them. Talk to anybody. Why not? Talking doesn't hurt. And if you're sure of yourself and you know what you believe, you should be able to have a conversation. I mean, it's very rare someone comes up to me and goes ahead and says, feels like, I feel like they get the better of me in an argument. That happens very infrequently. So the battle of the five armies, man. Well, maybe, I tell you what, and you guys are over there. I'm not just you, but I know I got friends over there in Buffalo. What happened there last night was crazy. People getting run over in a car, and just like, I want to do something different. I want to do something more, but man, it's just too soon. I mean, and there's a third way. There is a third way, and it's a little bit flexible, and it's a lot smarter, but we're not ready for it yet. Things have to get worse before they can get better. I don't know how else to say it. People right now still treat this as a game. They don't understand that what we are seeing is stuff they're going to be talking about 100, maybe even 500 years from now, how this all shakes out. This is going to redraw the map of North America. I really believe that. And we'll see if I'm wrong. I mean, people always say on my show, Tom, why do you make such wild predictions? I'm like, and ultimately at the end of it, I come back to him 3 months later and be like, because it was what was doomed to happen. And the way you understand it, it's a lot easier than people presume. What you do is you look at individuals and groups. You look at their genuine interests, not the bullshit interests you're told they have, but think of what is actually in their interest. And when you go ahead and play out how they're going to act. And they have strategies where they can communicate, they can collaborate, they can conflict. They can do these certain things. And if you make it where conflict's inevitable, it's not crazy to predict that conflict will go ahead and get very, very bigger. So that is where we are at, and that's the problems we have. And I tell you what, it's funny. John's talking about the kindreds. He's referencing my new Albion concept. You know what? I'm starting to think maybe we could unite the whole Northeast as we look at this thing. I mean, I wouldn't. New York's a lost cause, but I think New York City is. But everything outside of maybe Boston might be doable. I don't know. We'll have to watch how this all plays out. But I think there's a lot of small towns that would start talking to each other if things get any crazier. And if things ever do get real crazy in the cities, it'll happen right quick that people will say that. And if DC loses control, the people will take back control in the country. And look, cities will do what cities will do. Country will do what country will do. And the one will not be on top of the other. That's what's going to happen. So, and we'll see how that goes. I know one thing. The question's going to be who can organize fastest. I wish I did more organization, but what can you do? What else we got? Thank you, Job Leaver asking. Dana is resting tonight, but thank you for asking about her. She would say hi to you all. I can hear her listening in the other room, so I know she's around. Let's see. But is violence the only thing left? I don't know. I mean, is there a conversation to be had? I mean, Democrats and Republicans don't talk to each other. And if I said, okay, well, if I like say if I went to this rally, let's say I went to New York and I said, hey, whites deserve equal rights, I would be beat to death if I went there with that sign. So you tell me about the conversation, or if you say, if you wear a MAGA hat, for instance, if you had the balls to go into one of these rallies wearing a MAGA hat, see what happens to you, not so good. And the thing is, people accuse the right wing of violence. The media accuses right wing violence. Blah, blah, blah. If the right wing actually used violence, we'd already have won the Civil War. That's what would be the truth of it. The right wing has been patient beyond any ability you could imagine after provocation. Because remember, what the left thinks of as social justice was compromises and concessions from the right that they've been compromising for 60 years. And people have come to think of it as a pattern instead of realizing that there were real painful losses that people experience in terms of culture, in terms of unity, in terms of believing in their country. The disillusionment on the right is beyond insane. You guys have no idea unless you've been part of it. And that's part of it. I get people on the left think that, hey, well, we're changing the world to make it better. There's a lot of people who think this world is worse and getting worse all the time. And I'll tell you the thing is, it's a majority of Americans, and I will tell you how we know that. Every year they ask this question in these big opinion surveys: do you think your kids will have it better than you do? People haven't said yes since the 1960s. And that's it. That's it. People don't think it's getting better. They think it's getting worse. And you need to make people think it's getting better. And you need something that is centralized enough to unify people. You need common belief systems. You need culture to have pride in. You need to have kinship. You need to have all of these values that we think are interchangeable. All we have is money and anger and anguish and novelty of experience. You can spend your money. You can indulge any vice you want. America, I'll tell you how America's fucked up. I'll tell you what the most messed up thing about it is. That America is a country where you will be treated worse for expressing a love of virtue than you would for going ahead and opposing vice. You really would. I mean, you would. They literally will go out there and say murderers would be supported, saying, oh, you have to understand them for these people. But if you went out there and you said some of the things we've been saying in this chat, you would absolutely get pilloried. And I know it because I did it. I know because I got things hidden about me. And it's just like, absolutely. And, I don't know, man. And I tried to work out the problems, and we could work out the problems. And Sarah asked a good point. I mean, and I know she's out there in California. So, I mean, we can have conversations. We can do things, and we could sit at the table. I tried for 3 years to sit at the table with these people. You know what they did? They basically bugged me, and they got a car chase. They had a Somali from Lewiston chasing me around. I literally had a fucking car chase. You believe that? I mean, crazy thing. And then I'm painted as the bad guy when I'm getting attacked like that. I mean, and that's why I have a little bit of credibility with certain people. My own legend precedes me. But I tried to go ahead and save people because I try to be a better person. And that's what I want to be. I'm not going to reduce myself to the level of being a hoodlum and a thug. If, the day comes where people who think like me take the field, you won't have to wonder what the cause is. It will be very, very clear, and it will be very honest. But we'll see if that happens, and hopefully it doesn't have to, because we'll see what the next step is. Right now, all we can do is wait. And like I said, hopefully these burn out, and then who knows what the next crisis is going to be. I mean, I don't see it getting better, though. I don't see how anyone's okay with the end of the election, I mean, and where the hell is Joe Biden anyway? Has he died yet? I mean, it just really doesn't. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But, I'm ranting now. I mean, that's what happens when you get tired. I am tired. I'll admit that. That's true. Let's see what you guys got here. If this worsens, do I think the military will intervene? Yes, I do, and I think they'll support the right side. The right wing, I should say. I don't want to say right side. I'm not trying to imply, but mainly because that's how they think. But we'll see. Maybe not. You never know. Has the protest helped or hurt helped? Anglos and Francos still got along in '67. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like English Canada. I like French Canada. I spend time. I go to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. It's actually really funny. Canadians treat me great. It's the U.S. Border Patrol I kind of have issues with. They make life miserable for all of us. But what can you do? I understand they're just doing their job, but it's utterly ridiculous. I literally got pulled over for 4 hours at the border once because I had a book that I bought in Canada, and it wasn't even anything bad. It's crazy. Funny way to ID any rioters. Fill up water tanks with purple dye. Easy way to figure who's present. That's smart, man. I like it. There are so many laws that got passed because they exempted law enforcement. If it hits us against them, the police develop a siege mentality as a result. It's only getting worse with no way back. I think that that's true. I mean, look, I don't think we need so many police, but I mean, you know what's funny? The towns that have the most police are the places that have the most, honestly, left-leaning think people. I mean, if you want to have fewer police, I'll tell you what you do: erase all the gun laws, okay, and let everyone carry as much armor and weaponry on them as they want. If you really want to do that, if everyone's afraid that when they piss someone off they're going to get shot, you will have a polite society. Was it a well-armed society? It's always a polite society because it's the threat of violence that keeps people calm. And if you give that power to the state, people will attack one another. If you give that power to the people, the state will respect the people. The founders understood that. What's his name? Patrick Henry understood that implicitly. And let's be honest, these were revolutionaries. They get why people would need to have violent abilities. Not because they would use them necessarily, but because the threat of violence is the only way you can go ahead and restrain the overactions of the state. And the police state does overreach. There's no doubt about it, man. You don't have to convince me. I was out there fighting the Patriot Act back when it wasn't cool. So I get the total argument of that. And I don't think having huge police is important. I don't think that's it. But if you want to know why we have huge police, the reason you have huge police in cities is it's the consequence of keeping safety in a place where people don't agree about anything else. You need a lot of referees when everyone's playing a different game. And that's what ends up happening in the cities. If you had, because realistically, you could go back in time and they had much smaller police forces that were frankly much more effective. And what changed about it? That is one of the things that people need to be aware of. Well, what happened was you brought in different groups of people who speak different languages, who come from different cultures, who have different expectations or different ideas. Say you bring in large Muslim groups, just one example. A lot of them, like in England, will practice things where they think that it's appropriate to treat women a certain way. But ultimately, that leads to conflict. And then the question is, what do you care more about? The safety of people under your law or not offering political offense? And unfortunately, in London, I will tell you, they don't want to offer political offense. So what happens is we start living lies. We have unequal enforcement, and it works in a lot of different ways. I mean, you go out there as a white person and you scream racist, that someone was being racist to you. Literally, according to the federal laws, you cannot go ahead and use that, even though it could happen. I know a guy who actually had a case that dealt with this. Whereas if you got fired for being a minority, you would be able to get millions of dollars in court. And so unequal and separate laws don't work. And it's been that way since Lyndon Johnson, I'll tell you. And this is not going to be a popular opinion, but it's true. The Civil Rights Act made things worse in America because they didn't create the idea of equality. They created privileged classes. And that's the truth of it. They made gerrymandered districts for minorities where you can basically have race baiters like your Barbara Lee types in the world. And it didn't make things better for the blacks. I mean, the black community isn't richer. The white community isn't richer. Nobody was doing better. And I'm not saying that, the idea of integration was a terrible one. I get it. And, it could have been an experiment well conducted. However, it was an experiment that was sabotaged from the very, very beginning, and deliberately so. I mean, let's be honest. Lyndon Johnson went out there and said he'd have them voting for him for 100 years, and he said it much more colorfully. But hey, he's a Democrat. You're allowed to use curse words when you're a Democrat. You can't do that when you're a Republican. And I'm not here to carry water for the Republican Party. Fuck them too. All they care about is making money and looking good for the cameras. And as long as things don't bother them, they let the whole world burn as long as their gated community could go ahead and hold up. They haven't cared about their people. They haven't done anything that's actually been good for them. So I'm not here to go apologize for them, in case you think there's anything in that. Like I said, I'm a political agnostic at this point. I mean, I'm well aware of what's happening, but I don't have faith in either party, and how can I? I've been up close in too many of them. I mean, we need something different. We need something radically different, and we need better people. I don't know. Ride along would be fun. I'd go for a ride along. You gotta give me like a squirt gun though, so I can scare the hell out of someone. You're going down. True story. Once I actually applied for a job in my early 20s in federal law enforcement. In some other universe, I'm a postal inspector. It's always funny how things. You ever think about the parts of your life that didn't work out? Like things are like if I was running my little town up in Jackman, or all the different things that could have worked out differently. But yeah, my new Albion book's pretty good. If you guys want to take a look at this here, I hope they don't loot either. Let's see. Yeah, my books are good. Enjoy them. If you can't afford them, by the way, reach out to me. I'll hook you up. I'm. That's not about that. You know what I mean? And I no, they demonize everyone, and I'll tell you what, they demonize people who are saying I'm a pretty laid back guy. I'll talk to anyone. I'm not nasty to anyone, and they've painted me. You should see the stories how they've painted me, man. And I have to tell you, sometimes I should admit this. Sometimes it's really useful. I walk into a room, right, and I am not an intimidating guy. A couple of you have met me, so you know how I really am. But realistically, some people are terrified. Oh God, Tom. It's Tom. I mean, I don't try to be terrifying, although I guess I can be when I want to be. It's just, it's funny that they create monsters so they can go ahead and imagine dragons to slay. That's what happens. And this is the thing, this is the problem with all of these fights. And both sides, by the way, both sides absolutely do this. And I want to be very clear about this, that one of the things that we are seeing is everyone's creating these enemies that they can't come back from. And so when people ask me how we get from this, I'm like, I don't know. Why don't you say, instead of fighting something, talk about the people you hate and try to work with them? I literally have a buddy now who, I shouldn't say this, but I won't say a lot of details. He is a heavily involved leftist in the Northwest, okay? Put it to you that way. And we have a lot of conversations, and even he's starting to realize how fucking out of control this is. And we have good conversations, and they're interesting because we're radicals who agree that the society needs to change. I think that's a good starting point. And then we just have our own layers of bullshit we have to get through, which is a little bit harder. He probably needs to be more realistic about things. And one of the things is that's really interesting about this is that when I was talking to him about it, he was just saying, well, all these things are kind of BS and we know it, but they do it anyway, and that's the whole thing. If you destroy people casually, don't be surprised when they come back. You guys have seen movies. It's all about a great book, Count of Monte Cristo. Edmond Dantes, one of my favorite books when I was in high school. Hero. He gets his name stolen from him, and he comes back to it. And then, that's what it is. And ultimately, that's what a lot of this is. That a lot of people don't realize there's a revenge story at the back of this that's going to come back into this. So we'll see how it works out. You guys won't mind if I put my glasses on for a minute, would you? It'd make my life a little easier. It helps my eyes. I'm an old man these days, you know what I mean? I got enough energy for one big push, I feel, and then I'm done, I think. Let's see. Even if we could have an honest conversation, the things we want are so different, we could never come to a peaceful conclusion. There's no compromise when everyone wants something different. Yeah, maybe that's it. I mean, Landon might be right. There might have to be separation, but that's a peaceful compromise. It's just one where you say it's a divorce. In fact, I thought about arguing for a national divorce on that basis, for not just on racial issues either. Honestly, there's a lot of issues here. Regional issues, economies are tough. If police were required as a condition of employment that they had to live in the city or district they're policing, you would see a different response to community issues. You would, but you would probably see a different sort of corruption. People would look the other way. That's what used to happen back in the day when you did that. And the reason they got rid of that restriction in law enforcement is because they literally had places where no one wanted to go be officers, because they didn't want to deal with the threats of violence and the other things. Astro, I'm sorry to hear you're having such a bad go, man. I hope things get better for you down there. I really appreciate that. I have no hope in government either. Don't feel bad. I mean, government's a necessary evil. That's all it is. All right, yeah, hit the like button, by the way. You guys can do that. It's easy. You lost 20 Facebook friends. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. I lose friends all the time. I mean, friends are hard to keep, man, because I will say one thing. If you can manage it, and it's a hard thing to manage, don't let your friendships be determined by politics. If all your friends are just on political basis, try to keep your friendships where you can apolitical. It's good to be able to get along with people. It's good to be able to do things with them. But if you are super ideological and your friends are ideological and your friendships are based on your common ideology, what inevitably ends up happening is if you end up disagreeing on something, you end up losing that friendship. And it's kind of a sad situation. And if someone abandons you as a friend because they're signaling on some issue, they were never your friend to begin with. And consider yourself fortunate for not having to waste that time on that person anymore. Friends come and go. I mean, if you have a couple good friends in your life, you're very lucky. And if you're really lucky, you find one real person to be your very best friend. And God willing, there's someone, of the opposite persuasion to you. You make them your wife, and then you have your best friend with you forever. So that's the good thing to get to, and I've been blessed to have that. So very happy about that. I appreciate that, Landon. I try to be entertaining, and Landon's a good dude. Actually, I will tell him that. Very great family, good guy. Walks a lot faster than I do. I'll tell you that too. Tough dude. Speaking the truth is indeed a revolutionary act. I agree to that. That's absolutely true. All right, I'm down to 5 good people. So hey, I look 58 minutes 56 seconds. It's almost like I knew what was happening. You're not a terrible person. You wish you were a terrible person. And that's the truth. And you know it. Anyway, tell you a prehistory story. You know, we used to have this thing where Dana and I would sit there and we'd do Tom's Mystical Midnight Hour, where I'd go into my giant collection of prehistory stuff that was absolutely ridiculous and go through it. But all right, you guys want me to talk about something? You said prehistory, pick a topic. I'll tell one story before I go. I'm going to say a prayer here, and then I'll tell a story, and then it'll be bedtime because I'm an old man, and I actually have to get up real early. I have to get up at like 6 because I want to be there when this place opens, and I got things to do. I don't want to get stuck in a friggin' line at the Home Depot because I got to get some garden box stuff. So, Heavenly Father, I just pray for the safety of all my audience, as always, for all the people who are out there, and that justice be done, and that we recognize that the people who have been fighting long and hard for your beliefs are people who need to be protected, and you don't let any race be destroyed in this fight that's happening, where we seek out justice, and remember, your justice is the highest one, and that ultimately the love of our fellow man is something we're called to, but the love of our fellow man should always extend as well to those who are like us, and that we should not always just love the stranger, but we should also love our brothers. It's easy to love the people we don't know. Let's struggle to love the ones we do. The giants versus gods. You want me to talk about Nephilim, huh? You want me to talk about Book of Enoch stuff? Oh man, that's a good story. Well, so all right, I'll tell the story. This is the story that gets told, and see if you believe it or not. That ultimately, what happened was before the flood, supposedly the angels came down and they were smitten with the women of men. And what they wanted to do is they decided the Watchers would come down as a group and they would go ahead and procreate with the women. And this is actually, this story used to be in the Bible. They took it out. They took it out after the 1700s, probably because it was so Christian. It was kind of seen as a little bit anti-Semitic, but you know, you can judge about what that means. So in the Book of Enoch, what happens is ultimately there is an angel that ends up kind of being the responsible party for these bad things, and the name of the person, that angel, is Azazel. And I actually believe, and I may write this if I ever write an End Times Bible, that Azazel is actually the real name of Satan. Satan is like a placeholder, like a demon. A daemon is a spirit. Shaitan is the name for an evil spirit, but Azazel is the actual proper name of them, and Azazel is an interesting character. Some people relate him to Ares, the god of war. Some people relate him to, what would you say, what's the one? Aries, the astrological sign, but what ultimately you should relate him to potentially is Prometheus, from the Western tradition, if you actually know it, and the idea that he was the one who originally taught man about the ability to use weapons and smithies. So this is how the actual story goes, because man was meant to be pastoral, living in service to the Lord, in a garden. So eventually Azazel comes down and he begins boinking all the women, and ultimately they go and they realize God's mad at them. So they ask Enoch to go up to heaven in the story. And Enoch's job is supposed to be to go and speak his intercessions. And God said, you're going to burn in a fire of 7 suns wrapped around each other. And you're going to have to sit there until you watch every children you have die. And that ultimately you will be erased from eternity by being burned in this fire. And that's what's said. And actually it's interesting because it's an apocalyptic book that talks about the second coming in terms of a burning by fire. So if you see those hell-related themes and imagery, a lot of those things actually come out of the Book of Enoch. But the Nephilim came down, and they were basically the idea that spirits entered in and made one with mankind and polluted the race of this, and that's what ended up happening. So that's the story of giants and men, but that they ultimately were destroyed in the Great Flood when the line of Adam, or excuse me, I should say the lines of Cain and Abel were erased in favor of the Sethian line that ran through Noah. And there's some really interesting books about it. If you really like that sort of thing to cover, go read the book of Jasher. That is interesting, and the book of Enoch comes into that. But they do find things like a serpent mound and all these things. I will say the thing about prehistory is we assume time always functioned like it does now. We assume that these stories are purely mythological, but it ultimately isn't. And yeah, the Sumerian myth is absolutely similar. If you know the story of Enki and Enlil, and you've read the Epic of Gilgamesh. I mean, I know Landon knows his mythology very, very well. We've had long conversations of that over way too much liquor and a fire. So, but yeah, there is definitely a story about that. And I will say one thing that will surprise you, but ultimately I think it's worth knowing for people is don't assume just because you can't see something it isn't real. The world is weirder than you would ever understand. It's certainly every day I learn that there's weirder things all the time to be shared, to be learned, and if you're willing to go ask questions, you will find answers. Just be warned that you can't unknow things you learn, and people I find go through life where they go ahead and they look for things that reinforce their worldview, or they look for safe questions to ask. There are very dangerous questions out there with very dangerous answers to be discovered if you are willing to ask them and if you're willing to pay the price of the search. Think of it like the Grail quest. You guys like Legends, right? It's like you have to go and you have to purify yourself to do it, and you have to be willing to cut out the old version of yourself. I'm a Christian, so I describe it this way: that one of the things that ends up happening, and I'm not even drinking tonight, but I'm just saying one of the things that ends up happening is that you find that you have to denude yourself of a lot of your own bullshit to go ahead and go forward and things, because you can't advance spiritually if you're carrying the weight of lies that you don't believe. And look, we all have different beliefs. I get that part of it. And I would suggest that some are true and some are false, but at least if you know your beliefs are false and you're holding to them, and I think a lot of people are burdened by that baggage, doing it thinking either pragmatically it's what I should do or what I have to do, you will never advance as a person unless you are willing to go ahead and be honest with yourself. You can lie to the world, but don't lie to yourself. Don't believe something is true simply because you wish it was true. And honestly, I will tell you, the world changes the more honest you get about it, because as you go out there and you're willing to do something, you will realize a very strange thing happens. The world begins to bend a little bit to you because now you are aligned with nature. You, in fact, become a force of nature, a spirit filled being that actually has meaning and purpose, rather than an animal and a sheep to be led by others. And where you choose to take that, that's your choice. But if you ever notice that both real goodness and real evil seems to come from powerful people, it's because of the fact that people take on their own agency. And then the question is how subtly they can be manipulated to serve different purposes, because that's how these things play out. But like I said, the world is a much more complicated and difficult place than we realize. And now, as we come to a point of inflection in this story where some things are changing in a very big way, it's something we'll all have to keep an eye on. So that's my little jaunt into prehistory and, mythology and, how should we say, pseudographica. That's what the phrase is that they use for that. And who knows? Maybe I'll talk about it more. As we go forward. You guys like when I talk about those things, and who knows, man? I tell you what, if I put a big, one day I might have a church. You never know. I think about it. I think about it a lot, actually. I'd be happier. I don't do things to make me happy. Anyway, and nothing is wrong with agency. Anyway, I think that's pretty good. Penitent is what I think I'd use. I've thought about the titles. But if I got up, I tell you what, I'd be preaching hellfire and brimstone like you wouldn't believe. I really think most souls get, what would you say, obliterated, when it's all said and done. So, and it's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy chosen of free will. What can you do? This is the way the life is, and, I don't, people, I think, make one false assumption about me. They assume because I'm a nice and a laid back person that I don't hold beliefs deeply. I hold beliefs incredibly deeply and incredibly strongly, and that I am willing to do things to realize my beliefs, because I realized one soul is worth an unlimited amount of lives. And if you understand that, then you begin to understand why will is ultimately expressed by faith, and if faith is the force by which the world turns. And how you connect that faith to things that are true is your very means of being effective or ineffective. So if you go out there and you lie to people, you can get away with things and you can manipulate them for a little time, but you will be hung by your own lies. Whereas if you speak truth and you're pretty ruthless about it, you will find that the world will begin, giving way to you, because ultimately that is what has to happen. I mean, those things which are true are true. And you have to learn to do that, and you have to learn to pay the high price of it, which is to be lonely and to be hated and to be despised and to be scorned and to be mocked. But at the end of the day, you also have the reward of knowing that you were actually real in a world that was very fake. So to each of you, I think that's a great poetic way to end the show for tonight. Do what is real, be honest with yourself, keep an eye on what's happening, and each of you has the tools, abilities, knowledge. You have a soul within you. Figure out how to survive these things that are in front of you in a way that works to your benefit, and hopefully to the benefit of those around you as well. We all are going to have to try to get through this. I'd love to get you all through it together. You bring a couple thousand people up to Maine, I'll give you a new kingdom. It'd be awesome. But other than that, let's just try to survive till tomorrow. God bless. You guys always have a good night. Much love to you all.